Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 1960. We're going to be taking a look at the Tielman brothers and they're going to be playing through Rollin' Rock. So let's get these guys up on screen and see how they get on. I'm just going to jump in here because the impressive thing about these guys is the way that they're putting on such a show, but also the time that we're talking about, because this was 1960 and these guys were around since the mid-50s and putting on shows like this, and the whole showmanship element of it is something that we associate with bands in the mid-60s and late 60s and 70s, and guys like The Who and Hendrix and people that used to put on a show as well as be great instrumentalists and great players. And these guys were really at the forefront of putting on such a show when they performed, and also it's having the technical ability paired with the showmanship side of it, because a lot of people will put on a show in order to maybe make up for the lack of technical ability on an instrument, whereas these guys are great players individually as well. And as you could probably tell from the intro, these guys are brothers and their birth dates range from 1933 to 1938, so they weren't all born on the same day. But just going through this performance and the sound, I know it's not great in terms of hearing the double bass because the guitars are mic'd up, a drum kit's always going to be heard, but that double bass, we can just hear the plucking of the strings, but not a great deal coming out of it, just because we've got a mic at the front of the stage here that we can see just being adjusted halfway through the performance to try and get it in the direction of that double bass. And just turning our attention onto Ponton, who's on the double bass here. By the way, I'm not sure if that is the correct pronunciation of his name, so apologies if you are Indonesian and I'm saying it incorrectly. But the way that he's laying down those bass lines, it's a shame we don't get to hear it because his left hand is all over it, and we get a great close-up of his plucking technique with the right hand as well. Just total mastery of the instrument, and some great lines going on there, even though they don't cut through the mix, because it'd be great to hear some of those lines that he's thrown together. And this whole performance is so solid as well, because we've got Lulu on drums here, and they're just tight the whole time through. And considering the amount of showmanship they're putting into the performance, it's really impressive that they're so tight the whole time. Obviously, being brothers, that's going to help in terms of the rehearsal time as well, because they would have spent so much time around each other just playing, jamming, and really honing their craft. And I mentioned the Indonesian link because these guys were born in Indonesia and they spent about 20 years there. As I said, their ages vary, so it wasn't until 1956 that they moved to the Netherlands, and they were putting on this kind of show. So they were starting to get a bit of attention because of the way that they played. And it was 1958 that they played at Brussels World Fair, and they were booked as the relief band for the main band. So while the main band were on a break, these guys would come on, and it was due to be for 15 minutes, but they just stole the show because of the way that they played and the show that they did put on. They got the attention of international promoters who then signed them up to play at German nightclubs. And as you can tell from the sound, this is real rock and roll here, and these guys were at the forefront of the Indo rock scene, which was the blending of Indonesian music and Western music, rock and roll. And the first single that they released at the end of the 50s, called Rock Little Baby of Mine, that was regarded as the first ever rock and roll record that was released in the Netherlands, and these guys were responsible for that Indo-rock scene taking off in the Netherlands at the time. So these guys were a really popular live act, and they inspired lots of other Indo-rock bands to get out there and start playing in Germany, and these guys would tour all over Europe as well. But let's get back to the performance, where Andy's now standing on the double bass, playing guitar behind his back as you do. we have it. What a musical spectacle that is, and I love this thing that they have going on with their legs, because it's like their legs are a separate entity that they can't control, and it just puts so much energy into the performance. But also, let's talk about Lulu and his drum solo in there as well, because it's one thing to be putting on such a show, it's a whole nother thing to be so technically proficient at your instrument. And I'm talking across the whole band here, because when Lulu gets into that solo, he's moving around the whole kit, but he's always making it easy to follow where he's going with his drum solo. And that's something that a lot of people find with drum solos, they might lose interest quickly because the drummer can sometimes lose the thread, or at least you don't follow his thread in terms of where he's going timing wise with the solo, whereas Lulu just keeps it really simple, not in terms of his technical ability and playing like that, but musically being able to keep tapping your foot to it. By the time we come back full circle, literally in this case around the drum kit, and then he sits down again and we're back into the track, you can have that smooth transition back into the track, and it doesn't feel like that drum solo was totally lost in the track. It definitely had a place because of the relevance that Lulu kept in there musically. Obviously, in some parts, the playing might suffer because of the amount of show that they are putting on, but any musician watching this, they might be tempted to look down on it because of the amount of showmanship going on, but then you give your drumsticks to a drummer and say, play that solo, because they really do rate highly on technical ability, and that goes across the board for the tightness, but also the playing on the double bass, the lead guitar, and just that overall rhythm as well that we have from Reggie as well. I haven't mentioned him yet, but the whole package musically is on song, and just the little techniques that are thrown in there as well. When Andy goes into his lead guitar break and he has that little rake across the strings, the little sweep pick across, such a cool sound, and really does show the depth of technique that Andy had as a lead guitarist. But these guys really did redefine what it meant to put on a show and be technically great at your instrument as well, because in the later 60s, we had performers who were playing guitar with their teeth behind their head and with their feet sometimes as well, but Andy was doing this in the late 50s and early 60s. Unfortunately, in 1964, Andy and Reggie were involved in a serious car accident in Germany, and from then onwards, the lineup started to change and there were multiple lineup changes, but Andy was always part of the lineup. He was the only one that was there all the time. But the Tielman brothers, what an entertaining performance we have here, and great playing across the board. And it's great to see a band that started the Indo rock scene over in the Netherlands and really probably made a lot of musicians stand up and take notice of what putting on a show really was. And definitely a few performers later in the 60s took on some of these performance elements to help them make a bit of an impact on the industry as well. But thank you so much for suggesting this video for me to take.